Hello, my name is Micah Denekachea, and this is my favorite video game slideshow presentation. My game of choice is Bloodborne. Bloodborne is a game that released in 2015. It's an action role-playing game developed by From Software, which is a company that is notoriously known for making a lot of unique playstyle games known as Dark Souls or Demon Souls or Elden Ring. They have a lot of games, but Bloodborne is among one of their most popular. It's set in a very creepy, horror-esque world where you play as a hunter in a nightmare/dream where you are tasked to kill monsters to end the nightmare. But, of course, as the player, you learn along the way that it's not as simple as that, and that there's a lot more to it than just killing monsters, and you end up uncovering really tragic mysteries. The reason I'd say this game is my favorite is mostly because of the atmosphere of the game. I think the leather clothing and like the Victorian look to all of it, since it is a game that is set in Victorian times, I think it's just kind of the world brings you in. Some areas being creepy, some being really pretty, and all the architecture, it being gothic, Victorian, vampire-like, blood, monsters, and all sorts of crazy fantasy-like things. I think it's really what kind of ties in this game and makes it so sweet, and ultimately I think that's kind of why it's my favorite. Also, definitely the music. The music is very unbelievable, and the story is just super, phenomenal. I think a big important aspect of games is their level/area design, because ultimately it is the atmosphere of a game that kind of gets you immersed, I feel like, that in the story. And since Bloodborne isn't really like your typical story game, it's a lore-based game, it is very vital that the area designs and the other aspects like music and fighting is what really ties you in. The levels are very diverse, whether it be forests, castles, cities, gardens, towers, random creepy dungeons, or even cathedral places. This game loves to remind you that it is in the 19th century, and it loves to remind you that it is always going to be dark. Earlier I talked about how music is a huge part of this game. Since the story is lore-based, you kind of get a better feel for just what the story is behind the bosses you fight through the music. The music really encapsulates what's so tragic and what's so scary about the beasts and people that you fight. This example right here is of a boss that you have to fight that's this big, scary, burning monster, and upon meeting it, you get this feeling of it being very strong and powerful, scary. It immediately kind of drags you into this feeling of discomfort almost, like whatever it is you're fighting is very grand and powerful. It kind of has this overhanging feeling like it's looking down on you. But as you unfold the enemy and you fight it, the music starts to transition to its real story. It's not just a big scary monster. It has a background to it, and it kind of takes this approach of kind of a more sad tone. Another example would be this boss here, which is a man that you have to fight in the game. When you fight him, though, you don't get this feeling of genuine fear or anything really like that. Unlike most of the enemies, he's not a big scary monster. He's a person, and so it kind of gives off this feeling of you know, it's almost angelic. Like you, he's a warrior. Now, I would say, as much as I do like this game, there are some pretty heavy cons, most of all being the difficulty scaling. Bloodborne doesn't have a difficulty option. You can't make it easier or harder. It's just one permanent set difficulty for every player. And unfortunately, I think the biggest issue with that is not everybody can get on these games and figure it out, or not everybody can just start off understanding it. A lot of people will often go into these games and just get thrown around by the enemies, barely even reach the bosses, which are kind of like the meat of what makes these games so flavorful. And ultimately, they don't end up playing the game or coming close to finishing it because they just can't seem to get past the first area. And I think that's a pretty heavy flaw. I'd also say the fact that it's an old game, it has a lot of glitches, and also the fact that when you die, like in most games, you usually spawn back with your items. In this game, for the most part, yes, that's true, but unfortunately not with heals. You do not respawn with your heals, and I think that's a pretty irritating, unnecessary aspect of the game. Also, some of the levels can be simple, but some can also be very maze-like and just super misleading, and you kind of get lost and end up needing to sometimes watch like a video, and I think that that can be, you know, very annoying for some players. There's not always a clear direction of where you should be going, and that I think is a little bit of something that could have been touched up more. Bloodborne, I think ultimately tackles an audience that loves like the fantasy, mythical, knights, monsters, uh, shoot, I'd say, weapons, the clothing, the mystical areas, and that very Lord of the Rings kind of meets like vampire monster slayer thing. I think the audience that they target for are people who love combat. They love, an atmosphere that's just kind of like, it's kind of like in your face. You know the kind of world that you're in, and it's just very intriguing. But amongst all things, I'd say it's a fantasy and mythical audience, and I think that's perfect because that kind of goes up the aisle of most people who play video games. So overall, that's why I think Bloodborne is my favorite game.